dark times ahead. These are not the end times, but rather times of uncertainty and transition. It can seem like the world is coming apart, but this is how order reasserts itself. In this part of the cycle, everything starts to seem eerie. Cracks emerge in what has always been a fragile peace. You can sense it. Paradox lies in that we must find our best selves during such times. Ours can be a story of self-discovery as we set about restoring some measure of light to the world. Yet we do so by exploring aspects of the shadow. This means confronting existential reality, brute facts such as the inevitability of change, the existence of evil, and the unavoidable nature of death. Confrontation prepares us to face whatever may come. And it is coming. Prepare with us. Plant the seeds for an empire of mind. And that is November 10th. We begin Mac's course. So, anybody want to comment on that text? And Max, do you want to just lead us into what you want to say in this course and what journey you want to take us on?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm so glad that Bard's here today to talk about some of these issues because I've learned a tremendous amount on these matters from Bard or explored them more deeply. So, for example, the idea of change. Bard and I would love for you to talk about this further, but this idea that shit happens and it's always going to happen. There's also this idea of evil, or the idea that evil exists. And I have been happily exploring the mythos of Zoroastrianism, which has a very distinct conception of evil that I think is important to wrestle with. And of course, Bard is our resident Zoroastrian. There is also this notion of confronting death and the reality of death, and indeed overcoming one's fear or existential fear of death in confronting other forms of darkness in the world as they arise. And then we have some other areas that, if time permitting, we might want to explore, such as crafting certain kinds of narratives and figuring out how to come together in solidarity around those narratives as markers of our community, of an expanding community that is dedicated to certain kinds of, let's call it, doctrine. So that's where I would love to start. And there are many different entry points there, but this is a great group to start to explore these areas. And at least superficially, if not tangentially, these are the areas we'll explore in the course.
Cool. Well, I love the title Empire of the Mind, of course. Nothing could be more Zoroastrian than that, since the original idea of empire was an idea of an empire of the mind, not of territory. The fact that an empire of the mind could be an empire of territory was a later discovery. Both are Persian discoveries, by the way. So if you go back about 4,000 years, and the Iranians and the Indians go separate ways around the Hindu Kush, and the Indians go off and live a very decentralized life, which is the great thing with India, as we all know. We love India for being so decentralized. You can't have a dictator of India. That's an impossibility. But the Iranians are different because their landscape is different. The topography is different, and therefore they develop a slightly different culture. And out of that culture comes the idea that you can have a center and you can then have an empire. And this is the first idea after the idea of tribe. So we must not understand empires like a larger form of nationalism or anything like that at all. This is long before major cities exist or infrastructure, any of that exists, because infrastructure is a consequence of the idea of an empire first. So I think we should start with the empire of the mind and claim that this is the original idea of empire. It's a really good place to start. And then start looking at territorial empires eventually throughout history, how they tried to mimic and somehow look like an empire of the mind, but be territorial. And infrastructure was, of course, key to that. The fact you could build roads everywhere, the fact you could communicate with each other in far more sophisticated ways, the fact you could store first grain and later could store letters and language meant everything. This is the birth of civilization. So it's a really good, so to speak, root of the phallus to start from, where we tried to build the phallus now under intense pressure from especially the AI revolution, to try to find out what it's like to be human now as we try to dance with AI as our tango partner and not always leading that tango. And I think we can easily say that as humans interested in other humans, taking natural interest in each other as a species, I think we can safely say that what's happening next will both require and will also afford us the possibility to go more and deeper into what it means to be human than ever before. But the question of what it means human now in the shadow of AI is totally different from anything we've asked ourselves before, since intelligence is no longer in any way whatsoever a human monopoly. So I'd like to start there. I'm intensely curious about this, and we're going to go into our shared product, obviously, which is a digital age priesthood, and what it means to pursue a digital age spirituality, because the questions we are asking ourselves cannot be responded to philosophically. They have to even be responded to theologically. We have to embrace theology to try to understand what's going on at the moment, since we are literally creating the divine in one form or the other. That's what we're doing.
So question about empire. The multipolar world kind of idea is that's more of a geographical style of empire, right? So an empire in the mind suggests something other than geography. And does this mean that there will be a bunch of empires, which are small, decentralized communities that are somehow linked together, and there'll be several of them in the world? Or what do we mean by empire here?
I don't think we should jump to geography too quickly. I think we should stay with the topic, which is empire of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, just imagine that all you ever had was tribe, the social. Okay, so you would literally kill anybody who wasn't a member of your tribe, because survival itself required that. Now imagine that's the nomadic lifestyle you would have to have. The nomadology is all about the social and nothing else. And there's a strong membrane around your community, and the outside world is just full of enemies, because that's naturally what it's like when you try to do Darwinian survival in a completely nomadic society. That kind of world never had more than 3 million inhabitants on the entire planet. Planet Earth had never had a population bigger than 3 million as long as we were nomadic. It's only because of permanent settlements and farming and things we could grow until one day becoming 8 billion people. So just imagine we start from there. The first idea the Persians start exploring, right about 1700 before Christ, is the idea of empire. And this is the idea of something larger than tribe. So any type of community of tribes, in pluralists, where people don't kill each other outside of their own tribe. So as soon as you start thinking, what does it take for my mind, empire mind, what does it take for my mind to go into a person I'm pre-programmed by biology to kill, and sit down with that person and enjoy life together, and maybe marrying our kids with each other and try to create a larger unit than the social. This is empire. This is the original idea. Other ideas like cities, nations, whatever forms we think of today would be corporations, whatever. Any larger forms than the social, to max 1,200 adults. Max size, right? Anything larger than that, we have to train ourselves to be part of, and train ourselves to dream about, and create narratives that extend our imagination towards that, because otherwise we would never be able to create a civilization. And this was, during the Bronze Age, this brilliant idea that it could be possible if we tried. It could be the ultimate event, that we could create something bigger than the tribe, which we're born into, something bigger than the tribe. And what could that be? And this is where the word empire is used for the first time. I mean, empire obviously being a Latin word, but the first time that concept is being used is, and it's an empire of mind, because it's the mind that has to be expanded, not the territory, to embrace and love the stranger.
Right. So Max, what do you mean by empire of the mind? How is that different than nations? Like, why is it not empire of the nation? Or What
Yeah.
is this concept of empire? Because it seems to me this is a concept that has a lot of baggage attached to it, that it sort of has, we felt like we got over empirism in the 19th century, and that we moved, to something else. But what is the utility of bringing back this concept of empire, and what do you mean by empire of the mind?
Well, I think I want to just acknowledge Bard's description there. I think it dovetails quite nicely. If you, in neutral language, think of it as a set of memeplexes, okay? A cluster of memes that cohere, right? Those, for lack of a better way of putting it, get downloaded into the mind. The more people, wherever they are in the world, who hold those memeplexes in solidarity with one another, they're going to start to accrue a certain amount of power. Now, those memeplexes can be socially destructive or they can be pro-social. And the more pro-sociality there is with any associated memeplex, the more you're pulling people into your orbit. So I imagine among the Persians, the first thing you want to do, short of just in contrast with other cultures, short of conquest or domination or killing and so on, is to say, think more like me, or let me think more like you. This is why you get so much of the syncretism associated with the Persians, right? The nexus, for example, between the Jews and the Persians that Bard is super tuned into. These kinds of, because you're always going to have a natural degree of pluralism in the world, differences among people and differences among worldviews. So if you imagine one axis as being unity, a unity dimension, and the other axis as being a pluralism dimension, you can go too far in either direction. Too much unity, and you have, a stasis, an uncreativity, or even worse, forced conformity. If you go too much in the pluralism dimension, everybody's fighting over the tiniest little differences. So what you want to do is establish in organic unity, is the term Robert Nozick uses, a kind of a balance between these two. Okay, organic unity is unity constrains pluralism, and pluralism constrains unity. And in that sweet spot, you can have, so the unifiedness and empire of the mind, if we are able to, doctrinally speaking, cohere, we will have a unifying set of dimensions. And these are going to all be linguistic, philosophical, and as Bard said, at least quasi-religious, if not outright religious. And when you have that, these are the seeds of unifiedness. Now, paradoxically, you're going to want to preserve certain kind of aspects, at least for an international, sort of what would be what's your term for it, Bard? A global digital priesthood. If you're going to try to have a global digital priesthood, you would want to acknowledge differences, but a significant enough overlap among worldviews to be able to cohere in solidarity. And that's really, I think, where the action is. And if we don't manufacture that coherence all over the world, there are those who I would say are enemies, and I agree with Bard in that respect, who are going to challenge us and suppress us. And they are rising and gaining power quickly.
Yeah, I just got off reading Yuval Harari's book Nexus, and yeah, it is the Netocrats that we wrote 24 years ago being rewritten, but it's beautifully rewritten. I must say, Yuval has done a really good job. And why I like Yuval Harari is that he's the popularizer of our ideas. He's a pop historian. He's perfect at it too. He brings it out to the masses and may have a huge career or whatever, but this guy is great in the sense that what we're doing and what we're working with, sort of, if we're at the forefront of the whole thing and pioneering, then certainly you will, all right, can bring these ideas to the masses. He's also picked up on the term the global empire. Obviously, this was our second book 19 years ago. And what we mean with that concept of global empire is that that's a fact. Technology itself is already a global empire. The internet is covering the entire planet. Elon Musk has made sure the satellites are also then therefore intertwined with each other. We are literally now living in a network. We're literally now living in a global empire. Technology itself is a global empire, and technology has no reason to have any borders whatsoever. The borders that we have are only there because we're biologically pre-programmed to hate anybody from outside our own tribe. That's one of the shortcomings of being human. And therefore, technology itself has no such boundaries. Technology might as well conquer the entire planet. Actually, technology is probably going to conquer outer space, not humans. That probably was going to happen in the future. So the global empire is already a fact. So we're talking about the tango, and sometimes the technology leads the tango we just need to follow. Then we have just started dancing a tango with technology, which is a global empire. So collaboration between people across the planet are absolutely necessary. And it's been necessary since 1945. Because we still haven't figured out we're going to lock up the bomb. And if we blow off the bomb, we're done as human beings. Not the internet. It's built to outlast the nuclear war, but we're not as humans. So already we created the devil in 1945. And now the next question is maybe AI will go off, for example, and become the devil. And that's, of course, why Yuval Harari's book is good right now, because it points that to a mass audience, this question. So the empire is already a fact. And it's a very neutral term, the way we're using it. But it's a dream for humans, an empire mind, to create larger units than the tribal units where we go to war with each other. You have to remember that there were a lot of wars before the Persians came along 1700 before Christ, where you literally just killed your enemy. If you won a battle, you not only killed your enemy, but you boiled your enemy's children in oil before you killed your enemy too. Right? So that was warfare. That was Assyrians, for example. So the Persians completely changed that mindset by realizing that if we conquer the enemy's territory, we can submit the enemy to us, but we can make the enemy part of the empire. And we can then allow the enemy and their children, the enemy's children, to have an equal opportunity with our children, because everybody will benefit from that within an empire. And the way the Persians realized this, which the Jews later inherited, and this is what's wrong with contemporary society, is that they realized for this to happen, to walk into this new paradigm, you need an elite who are devoted to the topic, who understand what it means, have the right knowledge. What we try to do with Parallax, with your course backs, is basically to educate people or enculturate them even to be ready to be part of that elite, the pioneers. In Judaism, this is obviously the Hebrews themselves who left Egypt, walked off to the promised land. But the idea is originally Persian, because in Persia, this is part of the construction of empire. Zoroaster Vishtaspa lays it out in early Persian history by saying that if you create an empire, you need a unifier of the elite that ties the empire together. At the time, they thought a court religion would be the best thing. And the funny thing is, they invented the concept of philosophy in that process, because essentially Zoroastrianism is invented and constructed to be court religion of an elite that can therefore connect an empire and hold the empire together as the elite of that empire by having shared beliefs that happen to be what? Philosophy. So this is the beginning of philosophy, long before Plato. So this is what the Persians constructed. And by having that idea of an empire of mind first, it could be possible to then create an empire territory, which was not to make it a huge empire and make lots of gains and become wealthy, whatever. The point with the empire was to keep peace.
Interesting, like this idea of the elite is so taboo in the society that should even be an elite. This is the idiocy, I think, of the negative aspect of democracy that doesn't admit to any kind of elite, because obviously if you need to have people in an elite who understand things that the rest of us don't. So
I think it's the price we paid for Christianity and Islam, in the sense that Christianity and Islam removed the caste system, at least partly, from Europe and the Middle East.
right.
But the problem we paid for that was what I call the call to transparency. Like, everybody should get along and everybody should walk into heaven together, meaning everybody must understand what we're doing. That's an impossibility. If you just look at the question of knowledge, if we quickly have to catch up now with AI revolution, as human beings who are not AI, or blood, or feelings, who have sex, who are human, right? If we're going to catch up as humans to dance this dance together with technology, for that to happen, we must grow quickly. We can't wait for everybody to understand what's going on. Actually, hardly anybody understands what's going on. But a few people have a sense of what's going on, and they can therefore lead. And the only way they can lead is create an elite that make an exodus out of the previous capitalist age into this new sort of attentionalist age driven by data flows everywhere, and walk into that age and therefore say, okay, we get this. We're ready to be the humans within this new realm, and we hopefully get the other guys to come along with us. But that's optional, right?
Yeah.
That's how you must do it. This is what I mean with it. And then later, we should just add that. Then later, because that idea of a court religion or a court philosophy that ties an empire of mind together, which we try to get back to today, because that idea was there, the Hebrews and the Phoenicians, about 1,000 years later, realized that an alphabet and language and written language, if we can teach written language to everybody within a people, that people can become its own elite to itself. And that's called a court language. And if you look at empires throughout history, there's no way you can have a British Empire or a French Empire or a Roman Empire without a shared language. So you either have to have a language, which means you communicate with everybody within the elite, or preferably, which we try to do here with Empire Mind, we have an idea what it means to be an elite, what it means to live in the age we live in and to be human.
Yeah, and I think this is not to say that there isn't still violence in the world. Relative to, say, the sort of the rumblings of the 20th century that were dark and to, extensive violence, we have settled down a little bit. And of course, optically, that seems crazy because we have a front row seat to all the violence in the world now, or a lot of it anyway, whatever the media takes an interest in, or whatever someone can train their cell phone camera on. But there seems to be a different kind of warfare going on, or a different kind of imperialism, if we want to stick with this metaphor of empire of the mind. The two major memeplexes that are in competition right now, putting aside the sort of the military industrial complex, is the sinoforming one, which is about surveillance and the application of a social credit system, sticks and carrots, right? Threats of sticks and the application of and the use of carrots to bring about social coherence in a hierarchy and hierarchical means, where the elite that you speak of, Bard, under this type of regime is going to pull the levers of the Skinner box, as it were, to make sure that everyone is in line. Alternatively, let's call the other one Satoshi forming, after the pseudonymous inventor of Bitcoin. And in this one, we have a set of lateral relationships and more decentralized relationships. It's not to say that territory isn't important. We always have to have somewhere to put our bodies. And our bodies can always be held up by men with guns who staff jails. But at least at the end of the day, with this advance of lateralization technologies, we have the possibility growing every day of the Satoshi forming memeplex versus the Sino forming memeplex. And while everything seems really dark right now, it's also promising. There's a glimmer of hope with these technological capabilities coming online. Censorship-resistant communications like Nostr, or obviously the use of cryptocurrencies, which they've seen better days in terms of brand because of all the charlatans that got involved. But through technological means, there is a way of addressing the sinoforming technologies of the social credit system, which the WEF and all of the Davos folks they love it because they imagine this sort of neo-feudalism, the dark dialectics between capitalism and socialism that they fancy that they're going to be the stewards of. They absolutely love it. They want to censor us. They think that the hoi polloi, the plebs are to be suppressed and silenced. And that's how you're going to keep social coherence and peace. And this is very much in keeping with the way the Chinese see things. But the Satoshi forming technologies are an antidote to that. And if we go back to this idea of why have a course like this, why have an Empire of the Mind course, is because it starts being a candidate for the channel of Satoshi forming technologies, as well as the requires the content, the memeplex of what it means to be a decentralist, what it means to live freely in an ethical universe of your own construction that will expand over the earth in an imperial fashion. In other words, right thinking expanded over the world versus elite power suppressing people to keep social coherence. Those are two very different worldviews.
So Max, can I I want to ask one question here, because there's two kinds of elite. There's one elite that Alexander was describing, where it's a group of people who are leaving the Exodus, and or their motivation is to grow, and that's the motivation. It's not to hold people as puppets on a string, which is a very empty kind of not an elite that has any value, right? So I think maybe if the Satoshi model has a value related to it, it's like that is corresponding to reality. Andrew, then just let me finish this statement.
Okay.
So there's these two sides. I think that are sort of extremes that I'm trying to find a.
No, that's not the problem. This is my problem. So the thing is, to use Yuval Harari when he said his best in his book, this is the conflict between order and truth. What we three are talking about here, and the elite you're talking about here, Andrew, is the elite of truth.
Yeah.
Is the truth pursuers. These are the people who seek and pursue truth. We are, all three of us. We're deeply spiritual and committed to truth no matter what. And that truth starts with the fact that we know we're going to die one day, which I call death as the absolute. That's the pursuit of truth. But what Max is talking about here is that right now, because of the chaos, and because the overwhelming complexity that is drowning humanity, people react like they freak out from all of this, and it's going to get worse, a lot worse. And therefore, they look for order. And that's traditionally when the dictator steps in and takes over and creates his elite. That's an elite of order. So we can call them elite of order, elite of truth, if you like, and use Harari's terms here. They're brilliant, because what we're pursuing is truth no matter what. And an empire of mind is built on truth. It's called Asha in Persian. It's called Artha in Sanskrit. It's Tao in Chinese, right? So it's built on the empire mind is also an empire of truth.
Empire of the Tao, yeah.
Yeah,
I like that.
But the other empire you're talking about that tries to control us because we're terrified, and therefore we ask the dictator to come in and create a surveillance society and control every move we make, because otherwise he might die, which of course Xi Jinping is doing right now in communist China. That's exactly what it's doing. And that is what I would call an elite of order. And of course, it's corrupt. And here's the funny thing. Speaking of Harari's book at its best moment, the funny thing is that you can then move that onto how AI actually operates. And you've noticed probably the Chinese have backed off a bit after this enormous hype around AI, especially coming out of China 5 years ago. Why? Because AI cannot be programmed to run towards order, because then it's not an AI. That is nothing but a control mechanism. But if you're going to ask the AI and ask it to be intelligent, you have to actually push the AI towards becoming truthful. And suddenly, that's bad. This is the best good news I've heard in like 30 years, because if dictators actually cannot, they of course hate truth because they love order and they do order no matter what, which is, for example, why dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping speak double speak all the time. You can't speak double speak to an AI. It won't get it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's so funny, because that means you can certainly train technology to run a surveillance society, but the problem is that all the data of our surveillance society go towards one central computer with some bureaucrats in there who basically have to have a whip on their back from the dictator, be terrified of the dictator, otherwise they're going to make a mistake, so they can control society as a whole. But everything else in the society, you throw AI into the system, the AI will only work and beat other AIs in competition with AIs by being more truthful. We already do already. I jump between ChatGPT and Perplexity already. Which one do I use? The one that's best at when I'm looking at what I'm going to do, the problem I'm going to solve, whatever service I got out there as an AI, which is best at that solve that problem, is the one I'll pick. So that's already happening. And that's a funny new take on it, because that gives me great hope for the whole decentralization project that Max and I are running constantly. And also for pursuing this elite of truth that walk into the future in an exodus ahead of everybody else, because we get what's going on.
That's kind of counterintuitive as well, because normally you think of AI as this big control system, right? But if it's actually going to create some gap, let's say, or a good company needs a gap or inefficiencies built into it to in order to still have a growth process.
AI is part of the global empire. That means that if anybody anywhere on the planet creates an AI, it will have global scope. The great thing about that is that we can have neighbors that are huge dictatorships and try to create surveillance states. But if we just have a one tiny city state, but we run according to the decentralization model with the pursuit of truth as the shared common agenda of everybody who's a part of that community, we can create AIs and they can stop those AIs from infiltrating, going across the membranes into the other realms. And that is fascinating, that idea, because at the it's so Taoistic. Ultimately, if you fight how things actually work, you're going to be a loser. And that is, of course, true for AI too.
So we could figure out some AI that will destroy North Korea or something, like just through sneakiness. Sorry, go ahead, Max. I was just said that.
No. It's
whimsical thought.
Yeah, it's like I want to assume for a moment based on the two vectors, Bard, you talked about, which are order and what was the other one?
Truth.
Yeah, order and truth. Working in service of truth, where your empire of the mind is predicated on that, versus trying to maintain certain kinds of appearances through doublespeak and critical theory and all the rest of it, the bullshittery that we're all aware of, and there's a massive pushback against right now. Perhaps not in China, but I suspect also in China. There is a level of we can imagine, I think, that, and I've seen vestiges of this in using AI. Let's just stipulate for a moment that AI can use doublespeak and will be trained in such a way that it becomes comfortable with logical contradiction. It is unable to verify in some sense some external reality because it's not a full sensocracy, I guess you could say, that combines, sort of a comparison between the external world and someone's subjectivity, or through language, or symbol systems that it manipulates. Let's just assume that it can be a technology that is designed to serve an empire of order rather than an empire of truth. Not only is Bard correct that through repeated through competition, we're going to start to value truth more because we need to value truth, and that's going to make it less and less effective in this other domain. We are more likely to see that when we combine AI with the lateralization technologies, and I'm working on a project right now as it happens that I would love to talk about on another day, but that really serves collective intelligence a la a correspondence theory of truth. Now, it's intersubjectively determined because people are still using language as a conduit in talking with one another and measuring their perception of truth. But these are still many hands on the elephant, as it were. So I think this is actually most promising too. I think AI is tremendously promising, and that there's a tremendous churn, a process, an evolutionary process that is going to be pegged to truth in the manner that Bard speaks of. And serving truth is really good for you. And the Grey Robes, this construct that I'm trying to bring to bear to pull people into solidarity around this is really the last mile of this. It's preparing us for the possibility, though, that in the interim, there are going to be artificial intelligence capabilities and bullshittery from government officials that people still believe in and worship, and so on, that allow them to pull the wool over our eyes or to manipulate people. If we think of the stratification of intelligence along roughly IQ, and I know you're skeptical of IQ, but let's say there are certainly people who are smarter than other people, or at least there are people who are more susceptible to mendacity than other people. And in that, you're going to get technologies that are able to manipulate people to a certain degree, particularly if they're not if they're busy with working and kids and shit like that, and you need to go get them to do one thing, which is go out and vote. There are very successful mechanisms for getting people to do single things like that. Tell them stories, tell them lies, and pray like hell, and you got 2 million people going for this candidate or that, let's say. More and more every day as our collective intelligence technologies improve, that's going to start to be mitigated. The whole electoral spectacle is going to be mitigated because it is a game of essentially pulling the wool over people's eyes to get them to do that one thing every 4 years. So yes, I find it very promising, but in the interim, before building an empire of the mind as a gray robe, for example, to use that trope, is really self-programming, is preparation, is doctrinal preparation, commitment to truth, good old-fashioned practice of the virtues.
You just said it right there. You said the first thing you do if you're going to join the empire of mind and be part of this talking about is that you look at your technology use and you refuse to use technology that tries to manipulate you.
Yes.
That's number one.
Yeah.
Now, all you need is a small elite who're so aware of what's going on at the moment. I mean, we got friends like Tristan Harris, Asa Raskin, Yuval Harari now. They're all coming out. This is the beginning of the digital priesthood. It's already happening, Max. We can stay pioneers at the forefront with you and me and Andrew here, and we can do it on the liminal web. But it's already happening. That's already materializing. And they're all saying what we're saying. They're all saying that number one thing, we must pros against technology. I mean, Tristan Harrison, The Social Dilemma, that movie is going to be more and more prophetic because he turned so many people around and started thinking critically about internet use, social media, everything. It just made everybody realize that, oh my God, Facebook is evil, right? Yeah. So that's already happening. And the first thing, you just said it, the first requirement to join the empire mind is to pursue truth no matter what. This is called Tao. This is called Asha. This is called Urta. This is exactly what Eastern spirituality bases everything on. Pursue truth no matter what. And I mean factual truth. Like, how does the world operate? Who am I? Why am I here? What does it mean to be human? All those things based on facticity, on factual reality. And on top of that factual reality, we can start imagining, we can create symbols, we can do art, amazing art based on it. But I think we've arrived at a point in history, which is the point in Process and Event, the book. We write a point where it's impossible to come back to people and literally tell them they're going to believe in anything supernatural ever again. We are post-enlightenment now. We're post-atheism. We're post-secular. We're post all those things. What that means is that we go back to spirituality, which really pursues truth more than ever. This is why I'm a defender of Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Taoism, because they always did exactly that. So that's for the empire mind right there. Number one, you now live in a very intelligent technological environment. Are you being manipulated, or is this environment created for you so that you yourself can pursue truth and identify with it?
Maybe that's a good place to introduce like something we've talked a lot, Alexander, the Sutra Tantra divide, because it seems to me what the society has, its criticalness of the machine, that's a sutric move. It's like deconstructing the machine. It's like saying no, right, to something, which is fundamentally the sutric path of Buddhism, right? It's just not this, not that, not this, not that. It's always a deconstructive mode. It's a renunciation of the bullshit, which is a preparation of the ground for something more interesting, is how I kind of see it. But
Oh yeah, that's what
What do
we
you
call
think
it,
of
dark
that?
renaissance in our current circle. We call it dark renaissance, and that's art, and that's the tantric mode too, what you just described.
Mhm. What is that? How does that feel to you, Max? Like the
I
sutric aspect versus, let's say, the sutric aspect is a no, and the tantric aspect is an intelligent, ritualized yes. That's a, if that makes any sense.
right, right. And one thing that I think is, I think, and look, I'm a baby compared to you guys when it comes to these traditions. But it strikes me that the tantric sutric qualities need not always be at odds. That it's
They're
important to
not at
have
odds. They're a
both.
foundation. Like a sutra is a foundation for tantra. They're not at odds.
Good, good. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when I hear folks talk about it, it seems like they're comparing and contrasting. And there are points of contrast. The way I like to look at it, nascent as I am in these kinds of traditions, is to think of it as a both and phenomenon. And the reason I like to do that is I do think that there are some sorts of, rituals, practices, and and I guess you could say right hand path kinds of ways of talking about doctrine and one's relationship to truth, rituals, practices, and so on that are important to onboarding people into solidarity with your doctrine. I also think, with all due respect to the certain power of tantric Buddhism, for example, but that the idea of tantra as using these mechanisms of energy and power and taking great care to respect the existence of those energies, to enhance and grow one's agency and sovereignty as a spiritual being, that these things work together quite nicely. And so it's almost like, and I hate to think of it in terms of levels, but when you're introduced to the ideas of the gray robes, if you're introduced to these practices, to these ideas and practices, it might take on a little more of a sutric cast. But as you progress, things might get more tantric as you excel and as you start to realize your aspirational self, which requires a certain level of empowerment because you're wanting to expand that self-sovereignty in the empire of the mind with others intersubjectively, because that's the whole point at the end of the day. And tantra, to the extent that I appreciate it, which is not to you guys' extent, but enough, is an empowering modality. And I think that while you want to respect that modality, you certainly don't want to leave it on the shelf.
I just want to clarify. So you can't do tantra unless the sutra is in place first.
Good.
Okay. So for example, if you're going to be an artist, if you do the sutra, you're going to do decorations. But you got to learn the craft. The only way to learn the craft of the arts is to do the sutra. To then do art, which is highly original, never been done before, unique in its kind, motivates people intensely emotionally. That's tantric. So the tantric is always built on the sutra first. If you try to do tantra without the sutra, that's hell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never. That's like a no, don't even go there, because you don't know what you're doing. So you have to learn what you're doing there for the sutras there. We can also say in a larger sense that sutra is on the side of the public and the profane. So we talk about the call to transparency in Christianity and Islam. It can never lift beyond sutra. That's why Christianity and Islam ban tantra and call it sin. Because they took the sutric religions. They don't tolerate tantra. But if you're going to go out of the profane of the public into the truly sacred and private, that's the tantric realm. So that's another way of describing it. So you're absolutely right. They're not oppositions at all. Tantra is built on sutra as a precondition. But the way Tantra is done is that since these powers are there, since these forces are there, since we're driven by sexuality, since, psychedelics are there, whatever, since these things do exist, there's no point in banning them. It's better to contain these forces and try to use them for good. And that containment of the force is exactly what the tantric practices.
It's really interesting that you say that. And in playing with some of these ideas and developing some of them and publishing them on Substack, something as simple as that, I've had some interesting feedback. I had one guy who is, who's former military. He's a real, he really loved my stuff, was happy to support me and all that good stuff. And he came in one day and he's like, Max, I've decided to stop supporting you. It's like, I really don't like all this gray robe stuff. It makes me uncomfortable. He wanted all sutra all the time. Or put another way loosely, it's not an exact parallel, but the exoteric versus the esoteric. The more esoteric I got, the more I made certain subset of my readership feel uncomfortable.
Which is good.
And that told me that I needed to develop more of a container, the Adenton, as you perhaps as you like to call it, or at least an inner sanctum of some sort that is a more private space for the exploration of the esoteric, where the exoteric persists and continues to do its thing and is, uses, markets itself and explores rote doctrine and, a set of basic practices. But it's when I get more esoteric that people start to feel uncomfortable. They're not ready. And that was a good lesson for me, because it told me that, for example, in a course, I'd better be careful with the esoterica, and, show the trailhead, but not try to go too deep. Going too deep is a journey that has to be established by someone who is much more sophisticated in these means than I am, first of all. But secondly, to develop a readiness independently and privately from the symposium, where the symposium can show the trailhead to the esoterica. And this is why I got into this idea of confrontation, where you have these very deep existential realities that every human being has to confront or ignore. And in ignoring or suppressing those existential realities, you can get certain, side pathologies. We don't want an empire of the mind with people who have failed to confront these existential realities, and it expresses itself as pathology. It will destroy us early on. So showing them the trailhead and saying, this is where this is headed, that strikes me as a good middle ground between the sutric and the tantric, but not go too far too soon. But as the organization or the community grows and develops, it can have its own internal and more private subgroupings that are ready to explore these matters. So
every tantric
yes.
group would say, don't do tantra, stay the fuck away from tantra. It's a bad idea. You wouldn't try to attract anybody to tantra. Tantra might be attractive to people, and that's only because they already have something inside of them that will go there. But for most people, almost all the tantric schools say, stay away. It's dangerous. Don't do that. So in a way, if we're talking about it, it's all sutra.
Andrew,
it's all sutra because we're just talking about it.
But Andrew, this is the way to keep people away that shouldn't be there. So it's a way of saying that, no, not for you. No, not here. Yeah. Don't come, right? Until they finally are ready, right? But it's true. What you're saying here is true, Andrew, because the first thing you hear in a tantric environment is somebody will come up to you and say, okay, don't write this down ever. You may memorize, but don't write it down. Because if you write it down, it's published publicly, we're done. Because the people outside of this realm don't get what we're doing. And that to me is so striking when I go into the tantragram, is that I get it. I know why I'm there. I know what's going on. It's actually like the most flawless experience I could possibly have. But the first thing that's striking is when I just drop the words like, if people outside of this realm right now would see what we're doing, they'd be horrified. They wouldn't get it, would they? No, of course not. And they realize that's why we have the container. So not writing it down, for example, in Zervanite discourse, which is like Persian mysticism, was absolutely essential. That's why you don't find a single scripture anywhere of the last 3,000 years of any Zervanite who wrote down anything. And that's exactly the point, because that doesn't stay sacred, but it's also not the sort of sacred knowledge that must be contained in the esoteric.
That's
You're
interesting,
absolutely right.
Alexander, because like I think the tantric in the Buddhism tradition, what it does is it creates twilight language. It creates a lot of texts, a lot of bizarre texts that you can't understand unless you've done the groundwork to be able to understand those texts in a in a psychophysical kind of way. So even if you did publish these texts everywhere on the internet, which sometimes happens, right? People publish these. It doesn't make any sense to anybody
Exactly, but the
because
point,
it can't make
is,
sense to somebody. So it's
Andrew,
self-secret. They call it
yeah, but Andrew,
self-secret.
it's not a technicality. The whole
Yeah.
point is
Yeah.
that people who can't understand the knowledge must not think that they can understand the knowledge and therefore misinterpret it, and all hell breaks loose. The point is simply there's two ways of covering something up. Either it's a total cover, nobody sees anything, or you leak it out in such a way that the people who should understand it get it, and the people who don't understand it don't get it. And if you're going to do anything on Substack, Max, you have to keep this in mind, that you must communicate in such a clever way that the people who should get it will get what you're trying to say, but the people who only misunderstand what you're saying shouldn't get it at all. That's the tantric communication.
That's the sly way.
Andrew is
Gurdjieff
totally
calls it.
right. Yes.
The
You're
Gurdjieff
right,
calls this the sly way. You have to be very clever, right? When you're playing around with these stuff, you have to be sly. You have to be. You can't be. You can't. You can't sell the. You can't sell it if there's any sense of salesmanship or phony marketing or anything like that. It's not what it is. It's corrupt.
One thing that you helped me get over, both of you actually helped me get over, is the idea that some of this stuff seems too culty. Their idea, this thread that in the Grey Robes, that not only with the apprehension of certain kind of technological means where we will be as gods, we better get good at it kind of thing. Not just that, but with the tantric connotation of we learn to be as gods, which we learn to tap into powers that are not superhuman. It's certainly we can't escape our humanity, but that are more powerful than what others are used to applying. That makes the average American certainly feel very uncomfortable. And the way I look at it is your enemies are going to be using these kinds of tools, and they're going to run all over you with them. So in preparing yourself for a standoff, a continuous standoff between empires of the mind in the next, now, I mean, we're in the middle of it, but it's only going to get hotter as we move into the future. That an elite, and I don't care if people don't like that, the egalitarians can just go to hell. An elite is going to pick up these tools, whether they're technological or spiritual, to be able to be the tip of the spear for counterpower. And counterpower is exactly what we're talking about, because the expanded hierarchy sinoforming model is going to be a form of power that suppresses, that oppresses, that subjects. The lateralization technologies, we have to be nodes in a network of empowered beings, of self-sovereign beings. And that starts internally and spiritually, as we said before. So when we start to pick up these tools, and yes, we'd better respect them and use them well, and to some extent, we find those who can be the sly ones internally. We can't simply eschew those tools, because to do so will invite us to be overwhelmed by the sino-forming model.
I just want to add one thing here, because Andrew is right historically that Tantra is optional in the sense that, no, don't come here. Don't do it. But there's one exception, a paradigm shifts. And the paradigm shifts, we don't get the answer in Tibet. We get the answer in ancient Egypt with the Hebrews. So what happens at paradigm shift is somebody has to walk ahead into the new paradigm, or all humanity is doomed. So at least they are saved. They will get to the paradigm. And if they're successful, they might be able to inspire and lead others. Since what human beings are good at is mimicking and repetition. But mimicking and repetition, the only things human beings are good at. They hate doing the novel. So you got to find those few guys out that are ready to do the novel. And they're precisely the people who seek the tantric. So what they would do today, they would say that I want to be one of the first people who live truly trying to unify myself with AI and be more human than ever, while I allow AI to be the machine more than ever. I want to have that man-machine marriage. I want to be part of that. I want to be a human member of that idea. Okay, so what do I do then? Well, our answer is pursue truth no matter what to begin with, which is what you base the Tantra on, because the thing with Tantra is that sutra is like the official story is always sutric. So if you declare a sutric truth, it's the truth the society needs to hear to be kept together, right? The tantric truth is the real truth. It's the authentic truth. It's the truth that would kill you if you weren't prepared to hear it. So you move from the sutric truth, you realize, okay, so this is the story I was told as a child. To be a good child, to go to school, to do whatever I needed to do, to one day become an independent adult who could take responsibility for myself, and therefore maybe now I'm ready to pursue the truth no matter what. And that's the tantric truth. And that level is the difference. So right now, the question is, who out there is ready to walk into the future with us in an uncompromising way, who is spiritually ready to be part of that? Who is ready to be tantric, because right now tantric is required, it's not optional. We need a new elite, which precisely along the time axis is tantric, because it's literally a people from the future, which exactly how the Hebrews described themselves in Egypt. They were literally a tribe from the future who therefore left an Egypt that was stuck in the past.
Yeah, and I think the Egypt is a desert, but I think the tantric path is like you meditate in the center of the chaos. You know, really, they actually in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Bardo practices is not going off into quietude. It's quite the opposite. It's going right into the middle of the storm or into the intensity, and you actually practice, you know, in that moment, right? The metaphor is like the bardo is like after death, but it's really the most intense moment between one death, the death of this culture, and the next culture. So this in-between bardo moment is a moment of incredible intensity. So I think only the tantric paths can actually deal with that, whereas the sutric paths are much slower and more, clunky. But I agree with Alexander in the sense that this is a very tantric time, because it is a time of bardo, of in-betweenness, which I think Max talks about a lot as well.
So for example,
I want to pick up on that as well, in the sense that Bard, you refer to process and event, which is obviously the title of your book, and in going away from that experience, which is phenomenal. I mean, you know, this audience knows full well probably about the book and has read it, but in understanding, roughly speaking, events and paradigm changes throughout human history might occur at a certain rate. There's going to be a randomness to that rate, but it happens epically, at different levels of description in a manner that human beings can handle in a lifetime, if that makes sense. If you were, let's call that the natural rate of passage of events or of paradigm changes. If you, in this era, after the acceleration of technological means and compounding complexity, you're going to accelerate the rate of events and paradigm changes that are already accelerating. Beyond the natural rate, I would submit that there's a certain level of anxiety that associates with that. And anxiety, and it's an existential anxiety that has to do with change. And this is why I say the first thing that we confront in the course is this idea of change. And it's like, well, what do you mean confront change? It's confront the reality of change. My dad was a morbidly obese man who never changed his habits, never got out of the house. He was completely walled off from the world and wanted everybody to come visit him. But it's almost like there was this fear, this terror underlying the idea of changing his habits, getting out, doing, and so on, that he never fully faced, and he died in that existential dread almost. And he feared it more than death. Anyway, I don't want to get personal about my family.
No, yeah.
But
that's called motivo. That's not libido.
Yeah.
So that you got the term right there. That's why we use those terms in our work.
Right.
Yeah, but I would just yeah.
But when we finally appreciate and confront existentially, which is a head, heart, gut process, not just an intellectual one. So we start in the course confronting the idea of change as an intellectual exercise. It can come on through heart and gut modalities later in the as a confrontation process. And the reason we have to do that is because if we exist in this generalized anxiety that comes along with social complexity, we will be run over by the enemy. This goes back to this idea that there is this fundamental dualism between these forces, and if we don't reckon with that reality, we're going to get steamrolled over by the sinoformers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we have to find the talents who can ride on that change and are okay with that. So it's a personality trait we're looking at. Are there any archetypes out there, any personality types that can actually handle this amount of change and actually even enjoy it, preferably? Then they're the ones you pick for the tantric realm and for that elite.
Is a shamanoid one of those candidates?
Yeah, this is the thing about the shamanoid personality. The shamanoid personality is always the best one when you got chaos and tons of complexity in front of you. Why? Because they don't take it too seriously. It's like Andrew says, you sit in the middle of the chaos and you're totally calm. Who has that personality today? That's the person we're looking for. And that's why only the shamanoid can be the Hebrews. Only the shamanoid can take on and lead the Exodus at currently a paradigm shift. And here's the trick with paradigm shift, which is hard to understand and grasp, but there's no real natural speed at which they occur or anything, because that's too deterministic. No, it's worse than that. It's even harder than that. A paradigm shift means not only that history suddenly goes off in a new direction. It means that all of history until then has to be written and interpreted from the paradigm shift. That's why we don't talk about the Stone Age or the Bronze Age and the Iron Age any longer, because those terms were invented in the 19th century at the peak of industrialism, because stone, bronze, and iron are materials you use to create factories. So the world was understood as a huge proto-factorial age leading up to the factorial age. Today, it's all about information. It's all about the control of the data flows. It's all about what we could possibly do with data. And we're now going so deep into mathematics, we realize that, wow, God, it's just like discretion and continuity are codependent with one another too. They're not opposites. Wow, this is so weird. I mean, what's happening right now is that we realize that there's a lot more coming out of the zeros and ones machines that we have already. And we haven't even begun to imagine biocomputers yet. So this is all happening at a very fast rate. The only way to be able to handle this paradigm shift is, number one, be shamanoid, be what Andrew says, sit in the middle of the chaos with a smile on your face and be calm. If you
I have an interesting insight.
Yes,
Yeah.
great. Just finish, Andrew. But then then the world is yours. So this is what's required right now. But you also have to remember the entire history is now reinterpreted as spoken language, written language, printed language, mass distributed language, electronic language. You know, the whole McLuhanite universe is in front of us right now. And we can only understand human history from that perspective because we're now stuck in the information age, and we were always information age humans. Otherwise, we can't understand ourselves. So the problem is there's no natural rate at which paradigm shifts occur because that's deterministic. No, the really tough thing is that suddenly paradigm shift is just there. And the question is, who's ready to follow those who walk into the promised land?
Yeah, that's good that you're bringing up McLuhan, because he talked about how we're moving to a second orality. We're becoming more oral, whereas before we were stuck in the print age. And it occurs to me that the sutra kind of mentality, let's say the print mentality or the merely text mentality, is really it's all about trying to scale something, and that's a big seduction. And I think people with a tantric mentality or a deeper mystical mentality kind of shrug their shoulders at this idea of trying to scale everything. I think there's something. I think authenticity in the small is more powerful. It's like nuclear energy than trying to scale everything. And I think we've kind of had that conversation with Max a little bit before. This question of scaling in this sort of hyper hyper oral kind of everything at once kind of.
It was certainly written language that brought us Plato. And it was written language that brought us the Xin dynasty madness in the 4th century in China, which was the first totalitarian dictatorship on the planet. It only lasted for 30 years, but it was absolutely, absolutely horrible. I mean, Stalinism and all that is a result of little boys reading a text and thinking they're writers, and therefore they can fix the world because the world magically seems to be fixed when we write down things. So we totally miss the flux of the world because of written language. So
that's dualism too. We create this massive dualism between ourselves and our concepts, right? And then when the electric age comes in, then that kind of collapses. Time and space kind of collapses, and we can't live in this linear dualistic sort of frame of mind anymore, it would seem.
I think I probably the distinction that you make between process and event, process being cyclical, somewhat more predictable, maternal, and so on, and event being more phallic, more change oriented, where you get a sort of jarring. I'm thinking of this at a different level of description than the epical as a single lifetime, and the rate of change as being the relationship between the predictable patterns of life on the one hand and the unpredictable patterns of life on the other. The rate at which those occur, roughly speaking, it's not going to be like a pulse where there's a fixed amount of units in between each event, but rather a sort of an expectation of in the randomness that this is going to happen, can you handle it when it does in some sort of in a fashion that allows you to be able to adapt and really process the changes, both internally and externally. As more of these changes happen to us, the flux of experience, that has got to come with its own sort of anxiety. And I love the way you describe the shaman as someone who can be calm amid this chaotic storm, this randomness, this succession of changes. But I also think and hope that the shamanoid character, as part of a Grey Robes priesthood, can really help bring a calming set of intellectual practices and energy to the rest of the group. So, for example, I have found peace in a good old Western trope, which is the coherence theory of knowledge and truth. Okay. And that is to say that roughly speaking, you have these premises. And we're getting barraged daily by premises, by claims. But what's interesting is that people are becoming more attuned to relativizing these claims within a whole coherent framework or not. So when it lapses into incoherence, that's when people not only feel anxiety, they also start to feel suspicious. So in helping people practice learning to notice relationships in a holistic system of claims, even if that's just doom scrolling on fucking, Twitter or whatever, that your ability to appreciate or not coherence among the claims is an important factor in serving truth fundamentally, even if it's mere coherence and not correspondence, like being able to go out as a reporter and look, yep, sure thing, there's not any FEMA there or whatever it is. That's my thing right now. What's the truth of what's going on in the mountains of North Carolina relative to the hurricane damage? It is, being able to figure out within a holistic system how to call bullshit. And part of the Grey Robes exercise is, if you're going to use these powerful tools, approaching collective intelligence and serving truth tracking is something that you can train yourself to do better. And part of that is being a part of this community, is that we do that. We inoculate ourselves from the matrix of bullshit.
That's fundamentally Zoroastrian and Taoist.
Yeah.
So at least Andrew can speak on the behalf of Buddhism in our conversations, but when it comes to Taoism, Zoroastrian, this is the fundamental exercise you do, both with the sutric and then even deeper on the tantric level.
But dispositionally with the centeredness of the shamanoid.
Yeah. So here's the trick then. This is why I love Hegel. Hegel's absolute is precisely the limit to truth. Like the ultimate truth is always the absolute in Hegel, which is dialectical. That means it's a deadlock between truths. And here's the trick. When you hear a statement, you want to check it for coherence or decoherence, which is the great way to find truth. You must first of all ask yourself, is this claim meant to be informative? Is this claim meant to be entertaining? And what is the driving force behind the claim? What does the claimant want me? What does it want me? And that's the logos, the pathos, and the mythos. So the logos is this information? Is this correct, factually correct? The other one is the mythos. Is this person maybe only trying to entertain me, to go into a fun dialogue and have fun? And maybe I shouldn't take this too seriously. And maybe I could joke with it or play around with it. Or maybe it's an artist who's trying to get to some kind of deeper sense of human truth by not saying factually what's correct, but rather playing with it. So that's mythos. And it's equally strong with logos. And the third one is the pathos, which is basically which force is occurring here, which force wants something here and is pushing itself in a certain direction, and which force do I have as my sovereign individual, as you always talk about, as a sovereign human being? What force do I then respond to this force? And so we can have this kind of jam between each other, which is the pathical truth, the deeply emotional truth as well. And humans understand all three. Mythos uniting the logos and the pathos. The machine only does logos. That's the great thing they ask. It will only do logos. It won't do mythos and pathos, because mythos and pathos are totally human monopolies in that sense. And this is what we can then take with us, teaching humans to be more human than ever when confronted with a machine. Let the machine be the fucking logos. I mean, if anything, it's a fucking global library that's become intelligent, right? That's what it is, right? And how do I respond to that? Well, I have emotions. Machines don't have emotions. And I love to be entertained and have a laugh. Well, machines don't care about having a laugh. So the other things we do here as humans, and by being in between these three truths and saying that everything we talk about here has probably all three aspects, but please figure out first, is this logos, mythos, or pathos you're dealing with when you're confronted with something before you decide it's coherent or decoherent.
Yeah. I mean, the logocentric aspect of the, let's say, print age is kind of, and I think people are trying to solve everything through logos often, and that's another mistake I sort of see with hyperautistic philosophy types. is trying to figure everything out through logos. They don't realize they should take the McLuhan-esque insight that the medium is the message, right? And you know, the form that you're using, it's this kind of literalism that is kind of infects the internet age. People hyper conceptual literalism. So I think that's something that the Grey Robes have to sort of deconstruct, I would say, probably.
We're going to deal with a lot of computer scientists who think they're artists and philosophers, although they're not. But just because they're computer scientists and they run the world at the moment and get tons of money, they're going to be all over the place, and they're all going to be Platonists or Qing dynasty Chinese, right? They're all going to be this, exactly like Andrew says. They're all going to be from text and numbers. They're going to go back and say everything is discrete, it must be discrete. It's sort of Stephen Wolfram obsession with the world must be numbers at the end of the day, must be zeros and ones in every aspect. That's because they have their mindset on that. It's their fantasy they're dealing with, and that must be stopped. The answer to that obsession with discretion is continuity. Anything continues. I call it gravity. That's why they hate gravity. Plato hates gravity because it's continuous. Life is
How much time do we have, Andrew?
Yeah.
Oh, we have as much time as you like, Max. Yeah.
We should round it off, but give it another 5-10 minutes. I mean, the Sweeny versus part of conversation just to go 90
I'm
minutes.
here as I just let things go as long as they feel like.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to get one more thing in, and you guys may have your own things, but I'd really want to go to the subject of narrative.
Yeah.
The application of mythos, as you suggest, but also surfacing narratives as part of a greater memeplex. Starting the conversation, we talked about a memeplex, which is that great feature of an empire of the mind that is going to be important. It's going to be fundamentally, in some sense, mythos. And I dare say, you know, there are pathic elements to it, and because this leans more sutric, you know, this symposium is more sutric, as I say, show the intellectual trailhead and let people have their own emotional journeys with confrontation. That's what I'm hoping for. So I'm going to be a little more logos and a little less pathos, but certainly I want to emphasize mythos, the importance of narrative, the importance of having narratives emerge and retold and becoming the spine of the empire of the mind. If you were to toss a single idea into that, each of you, with that in mind, for the folks taking this course, what would it be?
I would just add that what we talked about before rhymes really well with this when you said much more logos than pathos, because that's the sutra. And that's exactly what you say. Sutra must be in place first. You start with that, and then an advanced study, advanced Grey Robes is going towards the pathos, because that's where the tantra is located.
Yeah, advanced Grey Robes. Yeah, well, I often find that people who are working with the logos are out of touch with the pathic nature in some sense, and they want to solve everything through the logos, and they don't realize actually that their logos has become very aggressive or pathic, or you know, they're very angry with their ideas, right? Or very but they think they're being hyper rational at the same time. So that's something I kind of notice. So I always sort of have a confrontation with that. We're talking about confrontation when I feel that somebody is so hyper logocentric in how they see the world that they take everything extremely literally and can't kind of dance with any situation. I get confrontational. I get that it brings out the pathic frustration in me when I'm confronted with that kind of logocentricity.
You're absolutely right. Nobody's more pissed off than a computer scientist being exposed for being a Platonist.
There you go.
But here's the trick.
It happens all the time.
Imagine you go back to the Zoroastrians and their questions in the Bronze Age. Imagine you're sitting inside your sociant, and you've got a few guys talking with each other, and you got the logos and the pathos, the two things that men are obsessed with. And the pathos is that if somebody comes in from that tribe, I'm going to kill him. I'm pre-programmed biologically to kill him. If I don't kill him, he kills me.
Yeah.
All right. The logo says it's game theory. The logo says, well, I'm going to calculate, so maybe we could both win. But in case we can't both win, I'm going to win and kill him anyway, because I'm just going to calculate my way. Game theory is the ultimate form of Platonism. It's just like, if I calculate this and he calculates that, and we calculate this and calculate that. And the way to win in game theory, we all know, is to ignore it, and then you win. Because the other guys get stuck.
Yes, but remember,
here's the thing. I'm just going to
in London, I used the game theoretical model to show how the rise of the proto-states.
True, but you can use game theory in sutra. That's the
Exactly.
point. Yeah,
exactly.
But when you go tantric,
like,
you have to go beyond the game theory. But here's the point. Here's the point. Exactly what you said, Max. As advice for Grey Robes and the advanced course or whatever you're doing next. It's precisely when you sit and realize that the pathos means I'm going to kill the stranger, and the logos means that I'm going to try to calculate my way around him and therefore kill him at the end of the day or get killed anyway. You realize none of these two models work. The only thing that can make me and a stranger from another sociant get along without killing each other, and maybe even marrying each other's children with each other, the only way that can unite the two of us is a myth.
Yeah, that's why
this is fundamental priesthood, because the mythos is the only way for two strangers to ever imagine the possibility of getting along.
Yeah, because it communicates in this twilight language, in this in-between language. It communicates gist and metaphor, and it's not literally minded. So I think that is the only way. And it also speaks of the future and the deep past, and it's not like running the numbers, and it's so that has to be part of the thing. That's why I kind of that's why I have pathos that's why I think, that's why I still argue for the essentiality of religion, on some level. But, I know.
And the essentiality of art and ritual in this case, because ritual is artistic, it's the ultimate art. So the trick is that it's like you almost have to borrow, you're truthful, right? You always have to borrow a lie from the future and throw it into the story, because then the story becomes even more truthful if you only had truths in it.
That's great.
That's what mythos is. And that's why I always remind people, at the end of the day, if you really want to know human beings, I can't compete with Shakespeare, because I'm just a philosopher. Because I'm doing logos, he's doing the mythos. So keep that in mind. I think that's essential to Grey Robes' work, I think, to stay with the mythos at all times.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true, Alexander, because you're a very mythic philosopher at the same time. You do take on kind of the myth as well, whereas a lot of philosophers don't.
I defend it, but I'm not going to express it, because I embrace artists to do that. I want to inspire those artists, but I'm the philosopher. Yes,
it's exactly the reason, Andrew, when you asked me for the second article and I gave you the thing on confrontation, we opened with this. We had two stories. I think we might have opened with the myth of the young woman who descends into the underworld, and by the time she gets there, she's completely naked, and there's symbolism in this, but she's stripped of her power, her royalty, her sexuality, her sexual prowess, and she stands before her sister, who represents the ultimate existential reality, which is death. And then there's the story that's your favorite monk, and please remind me his name, Andrew. One of your favorite.
My favorite monk. In which tradition? In Rinzai tradition, or in the because I have two traditions that I love. Is the Tantric
the monk
Buddhist
who goes into the cave and
Milarepa, maybe Milarepa.
Yeah,
Milarepa, who dances with all the demons in the cave.
Yeah, and I include that because really that is mythic, and yet connects to the spiritual tradition of confrontation. If we don't do this, if we don't behave as that monk did, and we can see in him an empowering way of overcoming the ultimate fears, which are existential. Yeah. If we don't do that, we're not going to be prepared for the coming upheaval. That is the point that I wanted to make to Tom when he says, "What is this about?" That's it.
Right. So kind of what he does, it's this taming the demon practices kind of in the tantric tradition. Yeah.
Yeah.
And making them, transforming these vicious spirits into friends and ornaments and all kinds of things.
Mm.
I'm waxing here poetic here, so forgive
And
me.
that's tantra too, right? In a way.
Of course, that's what it is. Yeah, of course. It's alchemy. I mean, tantric is sort of is psychophysical alchemy, right? It's turning poison into gold, you know. Not actually, it's turning you know, Tractum came to explain this to me. You can't turn lead into gold. It's turning gold into gold, but because we think it's lead, we have to, you know.
Or this I would say to Christians and Muslims is turning sin into infinite bliss. Now live with that.
Sure. Turning
That's a great.
turning, it's working with aggression and passion, not turning away from those things, right?
True.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm so looking forward to the course. It's going to be awesome. I'll drop in and out of the course whenever I have access to it. So I'm going to be traveling around the world quite a lot this winter. So I'm very excited about
got
it.
it.
Yep.
Excellent.
Wonderful, Alexander. Yeah. And
Yeah.
nice to have this talk again. We haven't talked about sutra and tantra for a long time. And I'm glad we were bringing this into your discussion of the gray robes, Max. I hope it sings to you.
This is wonderful. It's such food for thought, and I'm delighted with today's discussion. It was just a blast.
And by the way, the Grey Robes with Mark's Borders is a good precursor to what I'm planning to do with Tom and Andrew at Parallax next year, which is to start exploring for the next book I'm going to write with the Parallax community involved in the whole writing process.
We've got.
I'm going to do a really true deep book on Eastern mysticism. That's where we're going next.
Yeah, that's going to be incredible. And there's all kinds of surprises and things coming up at Parallax soon. Me and Tom are scheming away.
Yeah. Stay tuned, everybody.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Exactly.
Please
okay.
do.
Thanks, guys.
Big love.
Bye, guys.
Good night.